I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I know that in a few moments here I'm going to yield the floor, hopefully, to my colleagues who will have an announcement about the progress that's been made on the Veterans Bill, an important issue. I wanted to take this moment actually as to talk about a tale of two bills, a tale of two very critical issues that confront our country, both deserving the time and attention of the Senate, but how they've been treated very differently from one another. The first issue, of course, is one that's been talked about here, and I'll speak about it in a moment, and that's the issue of student loans in America. This is an issue that I care about deeply for two reasons. The first is I myself, when I arrived here on the floor of the United States Senate in January of 2011, I owed over $100,000 in student loans. It was, and even before that, for years, we struggled with the cost of those loans. My parents never made enough money to save for our education, so I was able to pay for it through a combination of Pell Grants and loans for both my undergraduate and my graduate studies. The undergraduate level loans were manageable. The graduate level loans for law school were quite a strain. At one point in our lives, it was the single highest expenditure in our monthly budget. So I know the cost of this. And the other reason is because I have the honor of serving as an adjunct professor at Florida International University, where once or twice a week I interact with young men and women in South Florida who are facing not just the costs of undergraduate education, but starting to think about how they're going to pay to go to law school or get a master's degree or any other profession that they choose. This is a very significant issue. And there are two aspects of it that we're going to talk about in a moment. And the second issue that is just critically important for our country is the well-documented problems at the Veterans Administration. And I don't need to go into a long dissertation here about how our men and women who have served us so honorably and so bravely in uniform deserve the very best care possible. And it's been well documented, the long waiting lists, but even more importantly, or even more tragically, efforts among some at the VA to cover all of this up, to cover their tracks and to cover up their incompetence. Let me be clear, the vast majority of the men and women who work at the VA work hard and do a good job. But there are too many that do not, and there's not enough accountability with regards to that. As I said a couple of weeks ago when I came to the floor and tried to pass a measure to deal with that, a companion from the issue that had passed in the House, you're likelier to get a promotion or a bonus than you are to get demoted or fired for not doing your job at the VA. Two very important issues, a tale of two bills because they've been handled so differently. In a moment, I anticipate that a number of senators will come to the floor, senators who I thank for allowing me to work with them to make this possible, and we'll have an announcement to make with regards to votes on the Veterans Bill. That's great news. The men and women who have served us deserve this progress. There's no claim that this is going to be solve every problem in the world, but it is an important first step. And I thank Senators McCain and Sanders and Burr and Coburn and others for all the work they've done on this issue, and we're excited to hear about their announcement here in a few moments, and if they arrive, I'll gladly yield the floor for that at the appropriate moment for them to do that. But I thank them. Our men and women who have served us thank them. And the people of Florida thank them. We are a state with an enormous number of veterans. This is an important issue, and it was great. I wish people could have seen how people worked across party lines to get this done. The effort, everyone's got great ideas about things they want to see added to it, about things they'd like to see in addition to what's been included, but we all understand a sense of urgency about addressing this issue. And as a result, we all have ideas we wanted to pursue, but we were all willing to put aside those things for another debate and another day in order to get this done. We need more of that in the United States Senate. We need more of that in the United States government. And I thank the senators who have worked so hard to make this happen, and my colleague in the House, Jeff Miller, for the work he has done in terms of bringing this forward as well. He's done a fantastic job. Compare that to the way this issue on student loans has been handled, however. This is a legitimate issue that needs to be addressed. But the bill that was brought before the Senate is a bill that included something that the proponents knew was deeply political and controversial, the so-called Buffett rule. We've had debates on that issue before. We can have debates about it in the future. But they knew that the simple utilization of that rule as part of this measure, as admitted, by the way, by members of the majority who have talked about this measure in the past, they knew that by putting that in there, it politicized it, and quite frankly, it doomed it to failure. So let me lift the veil a little bit for those who are watching at home, or those who are watching in the gallery, or those who are watching anywhere or listening, now or in the future. They knew what the outcome would be when they included that. But it was put in there for the purposes of saying Republicans blocked this, because they knew that that issue in and of itself served as a sort of poison pill that held this up. And it's unfortunate, because the issue of student loans is a very valid issue in America. Look, there was a time not long ago when higher education was an important option for millions of Americans. A time when, for example, even if you didn't have a college education, you could still find a middle-income job that allowed you to make it to the middle class. That's how my parents did it. Neither one of my parents had advanced formal education. Neither one, quite frankly, finished the equivalent of high school, and yet we lived in the middle class. We achieved the American dream because working as a bartender and as a maid, my parents were able to make enough money to achieve that. The world has changed. Today, if you don't have some form of advanced education, you are going to struggle to find a job that pays you enough to keep up with the cost of living, much less get ahead. This has made higher education no longer an option. It is now a necessity. This is an issue that needs to be looked at in multiple ways, not simply the loan issue, by the way. Take, for example, the story of a 41-year-old head of household who has worked their entire lives to provide for their families and now has lost their job or their business. The only way they're going to be able to get a job that makes it to the middle class in the 21st century, because the job they used to have has been automated or outsourced, or the industry no longer is around, the only way they're going to be able to make it back into the middle class and stay there is to acquire skills and education necessary for 21st century middle class and above jobs. But if you're 41 years old and you have to work full-time to provide for your family, and you have to raise that family, you can't just drop everything and go back to college for 4 years. And you probably can't afford it either. So we need to revolutionize what higher education means in America, so people living those circumstances can access it in a cost-effective way. Take the story of a single mother. I used to have an employee when I worked in the state legislature. She was the equivalent of my executive assistant. She made less than $30,000 a year because, by the way, that's what the state pay grade called for. But she went to school at night and became a paralegal, and doubled her pay on the day after her graduation, because she was able to acquire advanced skills and a degree that allowed her to improve not just her lifestyle and her quality of life, but that of her daughter as well, a young single mother struggling to provide and move ahead in life. The problem is that our existing higher education system is the one that we had in the 20th century. It's largely designed for a student who graduates from high school and goes to college for 4 years. But it is inaccessible and unaffordable for Americans who are later in their lives, who have to work full-time and raise a family, for people who in the middle of a career have found their job outsourced or automated and need to be retrained. That in and of itself calls for higher education to be revolutionized. The second point I would make is that there is some innovation in higher education. For example, there are a lot of degrees and degree-type programs you can now get online, but you will often find that the cost of those programs are as much or more than a brick-and-mortar institution would charge you. It costs just as much, and in many instances more, to get your degree online than it would by sitting in a classroom and taking lectures every day. And for many people, that's not realistic. So we do need to revolutionize what higher education means. The traditional four-year college, it would always be an important part of it. But we also have to have programs that do things like allow people to graduate from high school with skills that allow them to immediately be employed. More welders, more electricians. There's nothing wrong with that. Those are important jobs that we have shortages in, by the way. We need to create more innovation so that people can acquire learning in the most effective way possible. For example, why can't we allow people to package learning in any way they acquire it? Online, work experience, life experience, to be able to package all of your learning and acquire the equivalent of a degree that allows you to go to work. And there are real answers to these problems. I'm involved in at least 3 of them. One is a program called Right to Know Before You Go that I've sponsored with Senator Wyden. It is a bipartisan proposal. It's very simple. It says that when you go to school, before you take out a loan, you have to be told, this is how much people who graduate from our school with the degree that you're seeking make, so that you can decide whether it's worth taking out thousands of dollars in loans for a degree that doesn't lead to jobs. The other proposal is changing the way we accredit higher education in America today. Accrediting basically means you have permission to give college degrees. But the institutions who control that process are the existing status quo schools. And they'll always have an important job in our educational portfolio, but they can't be the only ones anymore. We need to change that so that there are alternative programs available that allow you to package learning no matter how you acquired it, so that you can get credit for that as well. So changing accrediting is a big part of this. I believe that income-based repayment should be a part of this. There's a more responsible way to do it. And thankfully, Senator Warner and I are working on such a proposal. I wish issues like that were debated as part of this solution, as opposed to simply a political stunt brought to the floor designed to get enough no votes by Republicans so it can be used in November on the campaign trail. Let me tell you, these student loans, $1 trillion worth, they're owed by both Republicans and by Democrats. We need to get this issue solved if we're going to move forward. On the Veterans Administration issue, which I see that a number of senators have now arrived and potentially have an announcement for us, we've made great progress. The one I'm proudest of, the whole bill is important, but the one I've been working on personally, the one we've been engaged in making this happen, is accountability. Giving the Secretary the power to hire and to fire those mid-level bureaucrats that are not doing their job. That's an important measure. I'm glad it's included in this. I'm glad the Senate will be moving forward on this in a few moments, and hopefully later today. Our men and women deserve better. A tale of two bills. One is an example of how we can get things done to address the real needs in our country. And the other is a missed opportunity to address one of the single greatest impediments to upward mobility and the American dream in the 21st century. And that's the accessibility and affordability of higher education. Because today, higher education is no longer just an option. In some way, shape, or form, acquiring higher education has become a necessity for all Americans. And we need to make that more accessible and more affordable. And it is my hope that in the weeks and months to come, that we will be able to put aside the desire to turn this thing into a political tool and come together to solve this problem. Because there's $1 trillion of student loan debt sitting out there, and there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who desperately need to acquire some sort of higher education, and they can't afford it, or they can't access it, or both. And they need us to address this issue, because this cannot be an American century. And the American dream will continue to slip out of reach for millions of people in this new century, unless we make the acquisition of higher education more accessible and more affordable to people from all walks of life. The 18-year-old that graduates from high school, but also the 25-year-old single mother, and the 41-year-old father who heads a household, and everything in between. This is an enormous challenge for our country, but one that there are solutions for. All we need now is the willingness to do it, and I hope that in the weeks to come, once we've passed this moment, that we can get back on this issue and solve it in a real and in a responsible way. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak on these issues. I look forward to working to pass the Veterans Bill here, hopefully today, and to move forward and work together in a serious and meaningful way to make higher education more affordable for every American who needs it in order to achieve their American dream.